So SpaceX just spent $60 billion on Cursor. $60 billion. That's more than the market value of many Fortune 500 companies. If your first reaction was, that's an insane amount of money to pay for a coding assistant, you're asking exactly the right question. $60 billion isn't the kind of number you spend to get slightly better autocomplete, and it's definitely not the kind of number you spend because you think your existing AI efforts are going perfectly. In fact, depending on how you look at this acquisition, SpaceX might have just admitted something very important about the future of artificial intelligence itself. The obvious interpretation is that Grok wasn't enough, that despite all of the money, all the GPUs, all the talent, and all the ambition, SpaceX still needed to buy an outside company to compete in one of the most commercially valuable areas of artificial intelligence. But I think the real story is much bigger than that. This isn't an admission that Grok failed, it's an admission that the frontier model race is no longer the most important race. The real battle is shifting towards specialized intelligence systems optimized for economically valuable work like programming, finance, engineering, and eventually robotics. If that's what SpaceX believes, then this acquisition tells us a great deal more about the future of AI than it does about Cursor itself. Let's take a look. Before we start, a quick shout out to my channel sponsor, Joa. They make amazing accessories for your Tesla and other EVs, and also have great warranties and customer service too. In fact, I use their accessories daily. Be sure to check the link in the description to get 5% off a fan-cooled phone charger, a portable tire inflator, a fold-out lap table, and a lot of other items. Oh, and they make perfect gifts for you and your EV-loving friends too. So be sure to check out Joa, and now let's get back to it. Hey y'all, it's Dr. Know-It-All. So yeah, we'll start with the news here. As Doge designer said a couple of hours ago here, breaking, SpaceX is acquiring Cursor in a $60 billion all-stock deal. And by the way, both the announcement and the timing of this announcement are not particularly surprising. SpaceX and Cursor had already inked a deal where SpaceX had the option for a year to purchase Cursor for $60 billion. And everyone speculated that the only reason they didn't purchase them outright at the time was because the SpaceX IPO was coming up very, very soon. If you haven't seen my videos on that, check them out up here or at the end of this video. So anyway, the IPO happened on Friday the 12th, and the purchase obviously just happened on Tuesday the 16th of June of 2026, so the timing is not at all coincidental. As for a bit more news about this, and I will leave links to the articles, etc. in the description, so you can check them out in their entirety. I'm just going to kind of read the headlines quickly here, because I want to focus on something else. Anyway, SpaceX locks in $60 billion Cursor deal to power AI coding push. This is from Reuters just a couple of hours ago. AP News then talks about the race part of it. SpaceX buys AI coding startup Cursor for $60 billion in race for an edge over Anthropic and OpenAI. And by the way, factually, what SpaceX bought was actually Anysphere, which is the parent company of Cursor, but effectively the same thing. And then a headline from Business Insider, SpaceX is buying AI coding startup Cursor for $60 billion. So I think we can take this as fact that this is a done deal. This has happened. So those are the facts. Now let's get to the interpretation. So the basic obvious interpretation, which is something of a bear case interpretation, is that SpaceX's model Grok, which of course was developed by xAI, but of course xAI is now part of SpaceX. So anyway, SpaceX's Grok was simply not good enough. Previous to this deal, SpaceX had Grok. They had Colossus, the data centers in which they could do all of the compute. They had capital, they had engineering talent, and yet they're still purchasing Cursor. So like I said, the simple interpretation here, and again, kind of a bear case interpretation, is simply that Grok wasn't good enough. But here's the thing, I don't believe that's actually what is happening here. There is, of course, a grain of truth in there. Grok is simply not as good as ChatGPT or Claude Opus 4.8 or even Google's Gemini. But I think the more important point here is that Grok was actually built for the previous war, not the current war. So let's talk a little bit of history here. xAI came online years and years after OpenAI, after Google, and even after Anthropic. And when they were created, the whole goal of xAI was to build a frontier model that could compete with OpenAI's and Anthropic's and Google's, etc. And Grok succeeded in that. It's not quite as good as the ultimate frontier models, but it is very good. I use it in the car all the time. Admittedly, I don't use it so much as my daily driver on my desktop, but I use it in the car all the time. Very convenient and works perfectly well. So Grok succeeded at the frontier model level. It got close to the level of the biggest players, and more importantly, it got xAI and now SpaceX into the conversation. But the problem with that battle was it was a battle for intelligence. But that was the previous battle. The current battle is actually where does the money come from in artificial intelligence? And that's the place that Anthropic has really shown everyone the directionality of where to go to make money with AI, not just create frontier intelligence models. And if you dial things back a couple of decades, we can think about an analogy with cloud computing. The first phase was to build the hardware for cloud compute. The second one was to build the cloud itself. But the third and very important phase was, where do you make the money? And that actually came from owning the applications that people actually use. And that's the reason why AWS and Azure and so forth are highly successful, is not that they built the hardware for the cloud, it's that they have the applications, the storage, all of the stuff that people need, and particularly businesses need, and businesses will pay for. And if we use that analogy, then Cursor becomes that application layer that sits on top of the foundational hardware of AI. So with that in mind, what does Cursor actually own? People are commenting about the fact that SpaceX bought a model or an IDE or integrated development environment, but that's not really what SpaceX bought. What they bought, number one, is users, millions and millions of developers, and that of course is super valuable just for the users using the product, but also for the data that they collect. They also bought the workflow, the place where coding actually happens. They also bought the model composer, which is highly refined for coding itself, and we'll get back to that later in this video. And they also bought the feedback loops. Every code acceptance, every rejection, every correction, every edit, every bug fix, every code review, every pull request, every merge, all of that stuff. That is the ultimate moat that Cursor has that xAI simply didn't have. So what xAI and SpaceX bought was not just the model, but more importantly, the loop and the data that generates. And if you read over the AP article, it specifically highlights Cursor's large developer base and the engineering community adoption of Cursor. And that's the real moat that Cursor has. So with that, let's turn to Anthropic as a guide. Anthropic has already showed the industry where the money is, and that's the reason why they are so valuable currently. So there might be an obvious answer to this question now, but if you dial it back a year or 18 months, it wasn't so obvious. But the question is, what is the first profession AI has genuinely begun to capture and earn money off of? It's programming, of course, and Anthropic figured this out earlier than everybody else. So why is coding valuable? Number one, because coders make a lot of money, but that's actually not the most interesting part. The reason coding is valuable is because outputs are measurable, reinforcement is immediate, productivity gains are really obvious, and enterprises will happily pay for it. So this is one of the first places, if not the first place, where AI can directly create money and lots of it. So the lesson here is that frontier intelligence is impressive, but if you're only marketing to consumers, it's a bit of a loss leader. You don't generate a lot of cash. Specialized intelligence, on the other hand, especially for financially lucrative areas, is very profitable. That's the key thing. So what is SpaceX buying with their purchase of Cursor? Well, what they're buying is the correct company, the correct directionality for tomorrow's market. While most people think of Cursor as a coding company, more importantly, it's one of the first successful examples of a professional AI platform. You've got coding today, you potentially have finance tomorrow, engineering tomorrow, medicine tomorrow, science tomorrow, law tomorrow. Those are all highly lucrative domains, and coding is simply the first domain where the economics have been shown to work, but it is definitely not the last one. And here's the most interesting part. I think that Grok eventually is going to move from being a model to being a brand, and we've already seen the beginnings of this with Grok Imagine. So obviously this is speculation, but I believe that what we are going to have is a family of Groks. Elon likes the term Grok. The term Grok is very, very geeky. Also, it has brand recognition by now. So what I think we're going to see is Grok and Grok Imagine, which already exists, and those are two different models. They are not the same thing. Grok Imagine is a different model than Grok. It does video and images and things like that. But with this Cursor acquisition, I think what we are going to see is that the Cursor model composer will disappear and will become Grok Code, but we will also see Grok Finance, Grok Science, Grok Engineering, Grok Robotics, etc., etc. And each of those Grok models will actually be a different model, optimized for a different reinforcement loop, and optimized for different economically valuable activity. So will they share a lot of infrastructure? Yes. Will they potentially share some of the foundation elements of the models? Yeah, potentially. But I believe that they will become increasingly specialized, exactly in the way that human experts have become specialized themselves. And so what we can see here is that Cursor's composer technology becomes the first or second, depending on how you want to count it, because again, Grok Imagine is not Grok. But anyway, it'll be a model that is optimized to do coding itself. And so when we see Grok Code, it will not be the same model that the consumer version of Grok is. It will be a specialized model. So what we'll see is Cursor's composer becoming the first major branching of the Grok family tree, but it won't be the last. What we will get is a bunch of, quote, Grok models that are all different models underneath. They're all trained up and optimized for separate specialties, and those specialties will be economically valuable, which will allow SpaceX to actually earn revenue rather than burn revenue while running their Grok models, and that is key. So while a popular interpretation is that SpaceX just spent $60 billion because Grok couldn't compete, I think the real interpretation is much more important and much more interesting. SpaceX has just concluded that the frontier model race no longer matters the most. The next more important race is for specialized intelligences, for workflows, for specialized reinforcement loops, and for economically productive cognition. And if that's true, then Cursor might not be SpaceX's last big budget acquisition, merely its first one. Alrighty, folks, that's what I've got for you today. Let me know in the comments what you think about all of this. While you're down there, if you don't mind liking the video, it helps out with YouTube's algorithm. Thank you. And if you want to really help out the channel and help us get to 100,000 subscribers in 2026, please do consider subscribing, hitting that bell notification icon, and I will see you in the next video. Bye-bye.